And so with that, I would like to introduce David and Chad from Xledger. They are a cloud accounting platform with offices and customers worldwide. So they do a great job in this space, and I thank them for putting on this program, and I'll hand it over to you, Chad.
Well, very good. Well, thanks everyone, and we appreciate you taking some time here. I'm going to share my screen here and get everything situated so that you guys can see.
We can.
All right, very good. All right, well, everybody, we appreciate you, like I said, and as the title slide says, inspire and execute, turning data into insight. So David and I have delivered this particular content. We did it in person out in Maryland to a conference out there. And the content was created after the actual title was, we came up with the title. So one of the things that we talked about was inspiring with data. How does that happen, right? Well, when you try to create content with inspiring data, there's really not a lot that the data can do to inspire us. So we learned that really what we needed to do was be able to find something that we could execute on. So really what it is analytics, tools, and technology. We've learned are by far 82% of the CFOs that have been polled want to devote more time to data so that they can get that insight. So how do you inspire with data? Well, like I said, you can't. So data is not inspiring. It's just numbers, really. It's really with the story that the data tells, right? How do we turn the data into insight? What are we using the data for? And more importantly, what is the data telling? What is the story is it telling for your organization? Does it tell who you are, or does it tell people what you do? So I'll ask that again. Does the data and that we publish and the stories that we tell, does it tell who you are, or does it tell what you do? And what is the difference between the two? So quick agenda here. David and I will go through who we are. We'll go through, tell you a little bit about what we do, our roles specifically. Then we're going to launch into the content, the 4 disciplines of execution, and how we take that data and turn it into executionable action, putting it into practice, and at the end, have some time set aside for Q&A. So myself, I originally from Texas. I've been here for 20 years with my wife. We have 3 wonderful children. In the capacity that I'm in here at Xledger, I focus on sales and consulting, and been doing this in some form or fashion for the past 15 years. So David and I are both here at our U.S. office in Colorado Springs. As Daryl mentioned, we have 5 offices worldwide. We'll talk more about that at the end, but I'm thankful and appreciative of you joining today, and we look forward to hopefully sharing some content that you're going to find value in and be able to take action with. Let David introduce himself, and then we'll continue on.
All right, David. Chad, I'm here. Thank you. And I'm David Curatar. So I've been with Xledger, joined earlier this year, and I have worked as CFO for a couple companies, one based here in Colorado Springs, which is how me and my family arrived here. And hopefully I've got a couple stories to share with you from my experience, and hopefully you find those inspiring. So.
Very good, David. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things you'll find if you're around us very much is we like to have fun. So have a little video clip here to help kick us off and kind of set the tone for today.
We've done it, sir. If we stay on this pace, I think we'll finish on time. I think we should keep going, make the office even more efficient. Sir, are you familiar with the story of Icarus? He didn't know when to quit. He flew too close to the sun and his wax wings melted and he died. Are you familiar with the story of Moneyball? A man uses statistics and logic to win several baseball games. It's my favorite film. The statistical analysis. It's so beautiful. This office is becoming a powerhouse of paperwork processing. I'm flying high, Sergeant. And I'm never coming down.
Well, I don't know if we have any Brooklyn Nine-Nine fans out there, if you can relate to that, but if you don't watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I recommend it. It's good, clean comedy. So really launches us into our first poll questions of the day, and we have a couple of others throughout. So if you were to relate to one of those, Captain Holt being pushing for more efficiency, that type A personality really driving, or Terry, maybe we should slow down so the staff can catch a breath a little bit and give them a break. Who do you relate to more? The majority, 2/3, are statistics and analysis. Let's keep driving, with a few of you being, you know what, maybe we should slow down. So that helps us, and we appreciate your participation. And really, it leads into, what we're going to be talking about today. So, as we continue forward here with stats and data and analysis, one of the things that we know is we're surrounded by data of all kinds, right? Take this quote here by Jay: "We're surrounded by data, but we're starved for insight." So, a couple of statistics and a couple of quotes here. 99% of CFOs believe that real-time financial insight and operations would enhance their decision-making. So 99% of the CFOs, and the key words here are real-time financial insight and operations would enhance the decision-making. And that was a survey that was done by Accenture. Another statistic, over 2/3 say that real-time finance will critically enable their current finance function. And that's another quote from Accenture. So what we're finding in our day-to-day conversations, so David and I, we do this on a daily basis, in all of the conversations that we have, or 90+%, is that people want the information, but they want it real time. They need to be able to make financial decisions. They need to be able to make them quickly, and they need them real time. So that's one of the things that when we get to the end and we talk about putting it into practice, is how we take that data, make it real time, make it easily accessible so that you can take those decisions into the boardroom and as you come to the table to start making those decisions. Here's some more humor for us. I promise we'll get into some real content, but if the statistics are boring, you've got the wrong numbers. And that's a quote from Edward Tufte, he's a Yale professor of political science. A couple of more quotes and some stats from, once again, our research and experience. And this one is telling. And I think that, we shared this in a webinar that we did the other day, but according to Gartner, which if you're familiar with Gartner, if you're not familiar with Gartner, you can go research them. According to Gartner, only 20% of data spend produces any business value. Once again, only 20% of all the money that's spent on data produces any business value. So, this was a survey they conducted back in 2019. And I think that's a telling statistic, right? We work so hard to pull the data, to find the data, to give us the data. But if we're not using that data in the right way, then we're just throwing good money after bad. So a pretty telling statistic. Here's another one. I think most of you are probably here in Colorado. I'm in Colorado. I'm a mountain biker, so this was funny for me. Mountain bikes are expensive these days, so this is just a flow chart. Obviously, it's not a graph or a pie chart, but I guess my question to you is, well, number one is, if you follow it, all arrows point back to cool by the bike, right? So this is a narrative, and it's different than what we're used to. We think of data as numbers, and we think of data as statistics and charts and all the graphs and different things like that. But if we're thinking about data, the question is, can data also create a narrative used in your decision making? So if you're part of an organization, or if you're a firm owner and you're working with a client that maybe is in the retail business, are customer reviews data? What stories do those numbers tell? Or does that tell, if you go to do a customer review? I don't know about you, but when I go, if I'm going to a restaurant for the first time or something like that, the first thing that I do is I go to Yelp or I go to Google and I read those reviews. And if they have good reviews, then I'm likely to attend. So when we think about data, there are lots of different ways that it can be used in the way that can tell that story for your community. All right, well, let's get into some meat. And the reason that we're here today is to talk about how we use this data and how we can execute on it. So some of you may have heard of this book. Some of you may have read it, maybe you haven't, but it's the title is The 4 Disciplines of Execution. The author is Chris McChesney, and then co-authored with some folks at Franklin Covey. But really, the 4 disciplines of execution is how do we take the data? What do we need to do with the data and the insights in order to be able to move our organization down the road, or help an organization move down the road whenever it comes to taking information? So the 4 disciplines of execution, for if you don't know, and we'll go through them step by step, but I'll lay them out here. Number 1 is focusing on the wildly important. Number 2 is acting on lead measures. Number 3 is discipline engagement. How do you inspire with that and keep a compelling scoreboard? And the last one is creating a cadence of accountability. So number 1, focus on the wildly important. when we look at the blue box there, a WIG, wildly important goal. So we're going to focus on the left side here for a little bit, and we're going to determine how we choose a wildly important goal. And it's laid out for us. We identify the most important objective that won't be achieved unless it receives special attention, right? So whatever that is, whatever the organization is, whether it be a nonprofit or manufacturing, we need to focus on the thing that is going to give us, or that's not going to be achieved unless it receives very specific special attention. So I'm not sure of all of you that are on here, maybe you have to refer to history class, or I doubt that anybody's old enough to remember, but who can tell me what was going on in the world in the late 50s through the next decade into the early 60s? And you don't have to answer the question, but I'll give you a minute to think about it. For those of you who might have got it, remembered back in that time, we were in the space race, right? We were right in the throes of the space race with the USSR. So when you think about what that meant, you know, we talk about the organization that was involved, and we're going to talk about NASA here in a minute. But if, and I doubt you can remember, but I want to talk about the WIG, right? So of NASA, whenever it comes to their space race, right? So you walk into, you know, your board meeting there at NASA, or your executive level meeting. Now we're going to talk about, okay, we're in this space race. We got to come up with these goals. Here's how we're going to win the space race against the USSR. So on the left, these were their goals. They're wildly important goals in 1958. And I'm not going to read through all of them. Hopefully you will. But if we look at the goals, I mean, how would you feel walking into a meeting and somebody put these up on a PowerPoint, or they laid them out in front of you? Number 4, the establishment of long-range studies of the potential benefits to be gained from the opportunities for and the problems involved in the utilization of aeronautical and space activities for peaceful and scientific purposes. Sorry. Does that seem, do any of those, based on what we know about a wildly important goal, does any of those sound achievable to you? I mean, does it sound like you would be inspired by these goals, or would you be overwhelmed by these goals? I can speak for myself personally. If someone came in and said, this is what we're doing, and they presented me with these 8 goals that half of them I can't even understand or know what they mean, it's probably overwhelming. It seems unattainable, right? So from an expiring standpoint, I will say no. From an executable standpoint, I don't know, because I don't really understand what they mean, right? So when we think about the organization that you're a part of, or maybe it's the organization that you're helping or you're working with today, don't do what they did in 1958, right? So let's compare and contrast. So remember, we talked about how to define a WIG. Now let's talk about how we execute on that WIG. So if you remember on that slide, the 3 ways that we execute is, number 1, you have to identify where you are now. You have to have a starting line, right? Number 2, you have to know where you want to be, right? You have to have a goal that says we want to be here. We have to have a finish line. And the third is we have to have a timeline. Well, you got to know by when. So start, finish, and time, right? So 3 very clear goals to be able to execute on that. So let's transition to 1961. Who can tell me who was elected president in 1960? You don't have to answer, but it was JFK, obviously. So JFK comes into office. We're in the space race. He stands up at some point and says in 1961, on the right, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. So now, executing on a WIG. Start line, finish line, timeline. Do we have that? Are they clear? Are they measurable? How many are there? Is there a finish line or any of those original 1958 goals? The answer is no, right? So JFK comes in and he gives a clear definition, a rally cry, so to speak, of saying, we're going to put a man on the moon and we're going to do it before the decade is out. And that got people stirred up, and we're going to talk more about that. And I don't know how the story played out, but in my mind, I can imagine, if we've seen all the NASA movies or the space movies where there's chalkboards all over the rooms, and there are multiple rooms, and you have all the scientists around, and there's formulas, and everything is on the board, and people are stressed out, and it's the 11th hour, right? And then to further focus this, I can see some young man coming in, his shirt's halfway untucked and his glasses are crooked, and then he even narrows the focus even more. So, we have this man, we're trying to get him to the moon, and then we narrow the focus even more and says, you know what, guys, all we really need, there are three big things that we need to get this gentleman to the moon, or get our guys to the moon and back. We need propulsion, we need navigation, and we need life support. So even narrowing them down even more, we can focus on how do we get the rocket into space? We got to be able to drive it and navigate it, and we got to be able to keep them alive. So now you've got even a better focus and a deeper rallying cry. So now we have, groups that can be divided in their areas of expertise, right? So putting all of that information that we see on these boards and all of the things that we talk about in our boardrooms every day, narrowing that focus to make sure that we are accomplishing that wildly important goal. Well, what happens, we all know, Apollo 11 lands on the moon, safely returns home, and everybody's excited. And now we have, where we are today, all the technology that we have today. So, let's start the transition to point number 2, if you remember, which was being able to act on those lead measures. So we're going to choose a wig together as a group, and you don't have to come off of mute to do this, but just think about it in your head. If I were to ask you, what is the most common New Year's resolution year after year? Right. Well, it's most likely going to be weight loss, right? Some people will say finances, but year over year, I think statistically, weight loss is typically the biggest wig. Everybody wants to be able to lose weight, right? So as we talk about lead measures, I think we need to take a step back and we need to talk about the 2 different types of measures. So number 1, there on your screen, as you see, is the lag measures. So what are the lag measures? What do they do? Well, the lag measures, they track the success of the wig, right? They're measures, if you're a CFO or you're an executive, those are the measures that you lose sleep over, right? Revenue, profit, customer retention, customer satisfaction. Those are all the things that are measuring the goal. They're called lags because they're done. By the time you see the performance, the activities and the thing that drove the performance is already passed. You can't do anything to fix it, right? The profitability for this year is set. This is what it was. We can't affect them. But if we look at the lead measures and really focusing on acting on those lead measures, the lead measures are really what track the critical success that are associated with the lag measure, right? So they're influenced directly by the team. So as you can see there, they're predictive. They measure something that leads to the goal. So we have, whether you're in sales and you talk about your funnel and your statistics of how your leads are coming in or whatever it is, right? We take the data and we're able to track it, and we know exactly how that's going to affect our sales revenue for the year or our bottom line, et cetera, right? The other thing is they're influenceable. So, it's Monday morning, so we have our team meeting every Monday morning, and we track these things, right? We talk about how we're doing as a team, and how we can influence, and what changes do we need to make? How do we need to adjust? What do we need to be more flexible on when it comes to doing the things that we need to do individually so that we can all together reach those long-term goals, okay? So as you think about the lag and lead measures, what are some of the things that maybe within your organization or the organizations that you work with have as wildly important goals? And what are those things? Are they already in play? Or as you start planning for 2022, is that what you need to really sit down and figure out? Like, what is not going to be accomplished unless we give it special attention? So think about that. Think about the lags and the leads, and how those play into to what you do daily as an organization. Quick note here that nearly 3/4 of small business owners change their CPAs because of reactive service. So, as a consultant or a CPA, being able to help these organizations that you work with, if you're a firm owner out there, and you're doing work with an organization, whether, like I said, it's a nonprofit or a for-profit organization like manufacturing or retail, being able to bring that value to them and say, hey guys, I think that in order to advance the organization to the next level, maybe we should really focus on what's a goal that we need to really focus on? What is that WIG that we need to establish? And then walk through these lag and lead measures with them. Moving on to number 3, keep a compelling scoreboard. So, we take all this information, and this is really the thing is whenever, and I'll use our store here at Xledger. Obviously, we're a sales organization. And we set goals, and we're in the middle of planning our 2022 goals. And I'm sure you guys are in the middle of that too, with it being budget season and all those different things. When we set goals and we've used the data and the statistics that we've gathered over the previous year, obviously we want to set stretch goals, or we want to set higher goals for ourselves. But we also need to know that we're playing a winnable game, right? So if we just come up with a number randomly and we put it up there and it seems unrealistic, and that's one of the blessings of our store here at Xledger, is that we can have these conversations and we can determine what's realistic, but we can determine what stretches us and moves us to that next phase, right? We want to have something that we're striving for, but we also need to know that we're playing something that we can win, and really being able to all along the way keep that scoreboard of how we're doing. These are the critical areas that we determine, and let's keep a scoreboard of how we're doing and track that and have a conversation as a team. Hey, how are we doing in this particular area? Or this particular area, looks like we're lagging behind. How do we fix that? So I think keeping a compelling scoreboard and keeping it out in front of your people or your teammates or whatever it is a very critical piece of this engagement, and making sure that moving forward, that there is, everyone knows that they're playing a winnable game. So we have another poll question here. So what's the biggest challenge for your firm? Is it A, taking time consuming manual tasks? Is it B, lack of insight, delayed financial reporting? C, or D, is it staffing shortages? Well, we just did a webinar last week, and one of the bullet points, or the title of the webinar, was the changing roles of the CFO. The future and the changing roles of the CFO. And point number 1 was, how are these organizations, CFOs, executives, dealing with staffing shortages within the organization? And it holds true here today. We have these conversations. Like I said, this is, we speak to organizations of all sizes, of all industries, and staffing shortage continues to be, and is today, one of the huge challenges that we're facing today. So, with automation and technology, and those are the things, when we talk at the end about how we really can help organizations, those are the things that we can help. And, we do have actually a webinar that we just did last week in the recording, and that we can access and we can distribute with your request, that talks about that and some of the ways that we can help that. So I'm going to stop sharing here and then move on. All right. Well, the fourth discipline of execution is developing a cadence of accountability. And I know it's a silly graphic, but this is really where the rubber meets the road, right? So, we can do all the work, we can spend all the money, we can have all the meetings, but if people aren't engaged, if our team isn't engaged and our team isn't excited, then none of it really does any good. So going back to that NASA story question, what do you think happened? If you put yourself in the shoes of those scientists and those mathematicians and anybody within that organization, what do you think happened to the accountability within NASA when the challenge of putting a man on the moon was established? If someone came in and you had the 8-year member of the team and they have those 8 very lengthy and verbose goals, and then someone comes in and says, you know what, our goal is we're going to put a man on the moon, we're going to get him back, and we're going to do it within the next 10 years. You can imagine, and the fact is that the excitement and the energy soared through the roof. And that, as we know, the ending of the story was successful, and many years to come after that. So transitioning here, putting it to practice. So I'm going to turn it over here. I've talked enough, and I'm going to turn it over to David, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to let David start sharing his screen.
Keep sharing your screen.
Oh, you want me to keep sharing? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
All right.
All right.
Well, thank
Go ahead.
you, Chad. I appreciate that. Appreciate the opportunity to share this story. And this is a story putting it into practice. So I was with an organization here in Colorado a number of years ago, and we actually went through the 4 disciplines of execution. And if you guys aren't familiar with it, even if you are, I really recommend you go back and read that for the first time or revisit it, because it really can. It's one of those tried and tested true business books that I think can really revolutionize organizations, really of any kind. So this one happens to be a nonprofit. So our goal was to really help children in poverty around the world rise up and achieve their highest person that they could be. You know, what impact could they put into the world? So one way to do that, you know, we provided education, we provided housing and nutrition and healthcare for the children. And this was in a meeting, and one of our staff spoke up and said that they really thought that maybe rallying behind the concept of providing 1 million meals. And so we talked about that, and just the name itself was quite powerful. So we kicked it around as a management team and liked it. So we got excited about that. The accounting group put together some research and found out that 1 million meals, if we could hit certain thresholds, we could actually provide a nutritious meal for 25 cents. And nutritious, and I really mean more nutritious than what I think the average American diet is. So we went to work, our staff heard about it, they got excited about it and rallied around that. We reached out to Food for Orphans, which is a local Colorado nonprofit that specializes in providing food to children around the world. And then to pay for that, then we engaged donors. And we also needed, you know, Food for Orphans would arrange for like truckloads of food that would come in, and we would have to have teams assembled and that would actually pack the food into individual meals and then get those packed into container ships and moved overseas. So the story is just exciting because the data of the goal of providing 1 million, finding out what the cost was, how many people do we need to pack each meal, and then engaging other companies. And like Microsoft is one of the companies that partnered with us, and dozens of other companies did too. But they formed teams. They came in and packed meals. They had a lot of fun. You know, they came in with team shirts and they competed against each other in a friendly way, but they got excited about it too. So they were really inspired with that goal. So I'd say our lead measure there was, you know, how many events, how many food packing events could we schedule and when were they scheduled? And that was just important, critical to guide us into the future and give us the, I think, the momentum and keep us focused on ensuring that we had, you know, the resources necessary to fulfill this goal. We were also, I mentioned before, finding donors. So we were out marketing team got engaged. They're out soliciting donations. So when pledges would come in, that would be another lead indicator. How much money do we have that we expect to come in? And then the lagging indicators would be, you know, how many meals have we packed? How much money has come in? And we kept measurement, kept a scoreboard. When we would meet, we gather the information, publish it internally, publish it with donors, and it just kept building this momentum. And really exciting things came out of it. One is our goal was not to build dependency. So we want to provide these services I mentioned, healthcare, education, food, and medical care, but we didn't want these communities to be dependent. So Zimbabwe was a great example of where that worked out very well. There was a chieftain there that he oversaw about 30 villages in Zimbabwe. And one of our team flew there, met with him and talked with him. And they had a relationship prior to that, but he really impressed upon this chieftain that we're going to help you and we'd like to work with you, maybe a 5-year plan where we're going to invest a lot but over this 5 years, we need you to step up and your community to step up and help with these orphans and care for them that are right here in your community. So the chieftain was excited about that himself, and he gathered the resources on his side. He put together his plan and was able to execute that well. So again, our leading were, how many scheduled events, how many pledges do we have come in, and then lagging, and what was shipped and what was packed. Ultimately, the main goal was how many stomachs got fed, and our goal was 1 million. And this kept going. I mean, it was a wildly important goal that we reached, and it changed our organization for that year, for that period of time. But we kept that in motion, and it kept going on, and was able to help kids in other parts of the world as well. So that hopefully you find that a little bit inspiring, because we sure did. And with that, I'll turn it back to Chad.
Very good. Quick question, I'll put you on the spot. What was the cost, the final cost per meal whenever you guys were done, all said and done?
So it did come in about 25 cents. So
25
yeah.
cents a meal. So
yeah,
wonderful story. And, just being able to take that goal and run with it and have a focus to be able to carry out that goal. So thanks for that, David. And I'll keep us going here. So putting it to practice, we've seen this slide. I'll go back to it, but surrounded by data, starve for insight. So if you think about Legos, I've got a little guy at home. So this is my life, right? Legos everywhere. Some of you may have lived the nightmare of the Legos, stepping on them in the middle of the night. But if you think about the pieces of Lego in the diagram, I mean, that's data, right? And how often do we walk into a situation where this is what we've been presented with? Here's the data, do something with it, right? From being able to sort it out and make it useful to our organization. Well, those are the things where we can help. And there are other applications out there that can help, many tools, depending on what it is. But from an Xledger standpoint, we can help, right? Take that data, to understand it, process it, extract value from it, visualize it, communicate it, is going to be a hugely important skill in the next decades. That's the chief economist from Google. So take that data and then sort it, and then arrange it into the things that are important to you. It could be financial, which we're talking about today. It could be non-financial KPIs, whatever those are, and be able to present those visually so that whenever you're in a meeting and you want to pull all of these things up, you know exactly the work that you need to do. What is that compelling scoreboard? How are we doing, right? So those are the types of things when it comes to technology, as you start to evaluate what can a technology tool like Xledger, or, like I said, there are many of them out there. Hopefully, you would choose to evaluate Xledger, but how do these tools really help us and take that data and be able to present that so that we can make real-time, insightful financial decisions as we move forward? So with that, we're going to turn it over to David. And David, I believe this is where I stop sharing and you take it on.
All right. Let's see. All right. So hopefully you can see my little set of 8 data points. And I just want to say, to me, this is an inspiring, probably is not to you. There's no information put in context. So make sure if you're publishing data that you have some context to put it in. To me, when creating a graph or a chart, I really feel sometimes less is more. So here's a little bit more information. So we have a year 30 to 33. Is it inspiring? Not really. Don't know what these lines are for. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's, I've got an IRA and a Roth IRA, and maybe that's the balances over years. But, maybe it's the number of maladies I have with my age. So that wouldn't be that inspiring either. So want to give you a case study to actually put this in context. So I was CFO for a company overseas, a US-based company, but we were education and training company. So we had, 30 million in revenue. So it's a pretty good sized company. It had been around for over 30 years when I joined it, basically in Asia, primarily in China, a little bit in the Middle East. But the school and, that graph, that I will share with you here in a second will provide a visual, I think, of some of what information is here. So you've got kind of the demographics of the businesses, And so here's the information. And when I landed, they didn't share anything with me until I landed overseas. And the first thing I did was get to meet the controller, who was phenomenal. And we sat down and started crunching numbers so I could get orientated to the company. And this is what we came up with literally within the first few days, and did not find this encouraging, I guess. So we basically saw that the revenue of the company had flatlined and that the expenses were actually accelerating. And did a lot of research into why was this happening within the organization. And until I joined, I was there to replace somebody because they rotated out. But in that absence, basically the senior leadership was more pioneering. So they caught a vision and they just threw a lot of money at it. And there wasn't any real measurement on lead and lag measures and how are we doing. So they just burned through cash at a pretty high rate. And our findings basically were, that the growth was flattening. In essence, when those lines crossed, and literally they were going to cross in months after we did the analysis. So talked to them. They had a lot of cash on hand, so it's a cash-rich organization. But at their burn rate, I mean, it's just not sustainable. Something fundamental had to change within the organization. And going around and talking to the business unit leaders, so there's probably 7 or 8 of them at the time, and there was absolutely fear in their mind on how to deal with this. No one likes cuts in expenses, and to raise prices seemed daunting to them. So the average tuition in one of the international schools was about $30,000 per pupil. And for them, it just seemed unfathomable that they could increase that price. So what they weren't grasping is that companies like Motorola, John Deere, they're sending executives and their families over there, and they pretty much will pay what they need to pay to get and recruit some high-level person to go overseas and work for them. So worked on that fear. And the other thing that we found is that there was this intercompany dependency. So there was a consulting company, and that consulting company was increasingly using the other business units as its source of revenue. So they were consulting in business practices. They would go to the other 6 or 7 business units and teach them things and charge them. So that was, when you stripped out those intercompany revenues, the company really didn't look, it looked even worse than when we got there. So anyway, our wildly important goal was obviously to right the ship. And we found that some of the concerns that they had with raising tuition, we addressed. And one of them was just very easy, very mathematical, is if you raise prices 10% and you lost 10% of your students, at the end of the day, what did that mean? Well, what it meant for them is actually they would save because the expenses would be lower. And so they moved forward with it. I don't remember if it was 5% or 10% increase in tuition, but they overcame that fear. So they knew the wildly important goal, and we started to put in some lead and lag measures. So typically in the spring is when people are registering for the fall. So that was, we put out the increase for tuition, and we watched our lead measure. How many kids are registering 6 months in advance for the next fall? How many prepayments and tuition were coming in that we were booking? And amazing, actually, there was an increase in enrollment. So that was really exciting. People had overcome that fear, and they actually were enjoying more than they had actually expected. So the other good thing that came out of that is the recognition from the board of directors that the consulting company needed to expand its business outside. So they really took on a marketing effort to go out to other companies not affiliated with our organization and start soliciting business, and they were able to do that actually. So and I've just got another minute. So the results that we saw here, so we've got some new data that we added to it, and was it inspiring? And I need to go back because I actually think that when the data didn't look so good, that was actually inspirational. Hey, we need to fix this, and that wildly important goal got established. Lead and lag measures got established. So I would say bad news sometimes is inspiring, maybe more often than good news. So they were able to do that, and they actually increased their businesses. So they had sustained growth in the schools. They could pay for new initiatives. They actually added a school, and they expanded pre-K. So they were putting together some pre-K schools too. So I think the overall wildly important goal was we need a company that's sustainable, and that was accomplished. And it took a team effort, but it was done. So hopefully there's a little nuggets of experience in there that you guys can find value in. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Chad.
All right. I think if you stop there, you go. Thanks, David. Once again, I've heard the story many times, and still it's a great story. So I appreciate that. Well, we're down the home stretch here, and hopefully you guys can see that slide there. If you can't, let me know. I'm moving between 3 monitors here, so hopefully it's showing the building here. But as I mentioned earlier, David and I are both here in our US headquarters, which is on the north side of Colorado Springs. If you're familiar with Colorado Springs, we're right across from the Air Force Academy. We can see the Air Force Academy football field. It's wonderful when the graduation is going on. We can see the Blue Angels as they fly over. But who are we? What do we do, right? So I'm going to talk about a couple of things. Number one is what type of clients that we serve. And number two, our go-to-market strategy. So the type of clients that we serve. Typically, on number one would be a client that is maybe outgrown, quote unquote, a QuickBooks application, a Xero application, or some smaller application. And when I say outgrown, it could be a number of different things, right? So I'm working with an organization out in New York where they have one entity with, I think, 17 other LLCs that roll up into that entity. So rather than dealing with 17 instances of QuickBooks, they're talking about moving to Xledger so that can all be handled in one instance. So, you know, as an organization, if they grow, maybe they gain entities through mergers and acquisition or just growth, that could be a great candidate for us. And those are organizations that we work with. Or more commonly, what we see is someone, you know, who has, and we had a great illustration in our last webinar, but someone who starts with a QuickBooks or a Xero, and then they determine that they need some automation in their APAR process. So they go and they buy a bill.com, and then they need automation in their time and attendance. So they use the T-Sheets application, and then they need all of these different things. And then they just start adding on applications. So now you've got QuickBooks, and maybe you have upwards of a half a dozen of other applications that you're managing as well, multiple logins. You know, the information doesn't travel well between those applications. You know, those are other areas where we can really be helpful. And I've got a illustration here in a minute to kind of describe that. The number two person or client that we work with ideally is someone who maybe has a competitive product. So it's a very competitive space. So you got Xledger, you know, enterprise level financial accounting ERP. We compete daily with the Microsofts of the world, the Sage Intacts of the world, the NetSuite, you know, the Oracle NetSuites of the world, Acumatica, and the list goes on and on and on and on. So, you know, with those competitive products, they're great products, right? And one of the things that we're seeing on a daily basis in conversations that we have, it could be something like the functionality of that product no longer meets the needs of what I'm trying to do. It could be the pricing is not working for me anymore because of the price increases. But the biggest percentage of reasons that we're seeing migration from those platforms is on the service and support side. So rather than, you know, an organization that has a service and support team that is a call center, it's a 1-800-HOPE, I call it, right? Xledger we handle all of our support direct, and I'll go into that direct a little bit more. So service and support, you get a number, you get email directly to someone here on our support team. So, you know, rather than being passed around to different people who may not know your business or know you or even know how to solve the problem, we have a much higher level of support, we believe, and are able to and focus on handling that problem when it comes in first. One of the things that we talk about when it comes to support, and one of the things that we talk about when it comes to service, is when you call in and you get one of our support team members, they're not just support team folks that are going to then distribute your call to an area of expertise. Those people, that first line of defense, we call it here, is they're people that have either been on a finance team, accountants themselves. So those are people, when you call and talk to them, you can talk to them in finance speak, and they're going to be able to help you in the technology with the issue that you have. So service and support, we feel like is a huge differentiator for us in the marketplace. The second thing I wanted to talk about is our go-to-market strategy. So how we go to market, we can do that in a couple of different ways. Number one would be direct to customer. So you know, I work directly with the customers. David and I, in tandem as a team, work directly with an organization. We work with the CFO, the controllers, the accounting team, finance team within that organization directly. Or we also have a partner channel, which is where CPA firms, fractional advisory, CFOs, controllers, BPO services, for a go-to-market through those channels as well. I think 80% of our global revenue actually comes through our partner channel. So that is a big piece of who we are in our go-to-market strategy. So around the world, 10,000 plus customers in 60 countries. This is actually an outdated graphic. It should be more in the 17,000 plus customers around the world. And like I said, 75 to 80% of our global revenue actually comes through CPA firms, BPO organizations, like a lot of you here on this call today. So if you're maybe you already have a partner with QuickBooks Online or a Xero, but you're looking for an enterprise level partner, or maybe you already have an enterprise level partner, such as a Stage Intact, and you've received that price increase from the partner pricing that they rolled out a little bit ago. We would love to have that conversation with you about our partner program, how it can not only benefit your clients and your clientele, but how it can also benefit you as a firm owner as well. Unification was what I want to illustrate here with this slide. And we talked about, that QuickBooks, and then going from QuickBooks, and then you get the Bill.com and the Expensifies, and the list goes on and on. When it comes to Xledger, everything really starts at the top of the Ferris wheel, as one of our prospects coined the other day, with that core accounting. And then all of the things that you see around the wheel was developed and managed by Xledger. So what you see a lot in the tech world is, we start this core competency of ours, which happens to be the core accounting, and we really need, a budgeting tool, or we really need an APR, AR workflow. Rather than developing that in-house, what you see is an acquisition of that technology, and then it's labeled and rebranded, right? Works well sometimes, but a lot of times what you have is you still have two different technologies, maybe under the same brand, and then information still doesn't flow very well. So another differentiator outside of our service and support, we feel, is the unification of our platform. Because we have built it, we do manage it. So a seamless workflow of information as it travels through all of these different modules, okay? Last few slides here, the three pillars and the things that we talk about in each conversation that we have is automation, insight, and scalability. And we've talked about the middle one there today, insight. But really what our goal is to help the organization automate and streamline processes so they can become more efficient. Give them insight to that real-time financial data so that they can make those real-time business decisions, and then grow with them as they need to. So really being able to come alongside and help that organization grow, and grow with them as they continue to press forward. And that growth could be international, it could be, multiple locations, whatever the case may be. And I think we're doing pretty good on time. So we do have some time for Q&A. Then after this, we have a real quick poll question. So we will open it up here for any questions. You can either do that in the chat, or I think, and Tiffany, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you can actually unmute yourself and ask that question live if you choose to.
Yep, either way works. Chad, there are a couple questions here. Let me pop them down. All right. So the first one is, what's a practical situation where you have experienced the difference between data and insight?
That's a good question. David, you want to tackle that one?
Sure. And I think to me, I think the data is, figures and calculations, and you need to kind of get those analyzed. And a lot of it is through experience to do that. Now, I know the staffing question, or the initial question is, what is most people concerned with right now? And it's staffing. So what's being developed right now, and there's some early adopters of it, and I think it will become mainstream in just a few years, but there's a development of AI or business intelligence that's taking the data, and it is doing what a human would do, like AI, and it's extracting from that data what is the story being told, and then also prioritizing it. What is the most important stories coming from the data? So, for instance, when I was overseas, our data was telling us, here's our expense data and here's our revenue data. We looked at that, and the chart showed that they were going to intersect in the wrong way. Expenses were going to exceed revenue. So that's just a very simplistic example of taking data and then finding insight into what that data is telling us. But then the more important thing is like the 4 disciplines of execution. What do we need to do? We've got insight into what's happening. We need to develop a plan to have what we're learning is happening, to pivot it in the direction that we want it to go. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's perfect. I think that's what I would say is, what story does the data tell, right? It's all about the story rather than just the percentages. It's the story that's related to it. Absolutely. Well done, David.
Perfect. The next question is, so CPAs and CFOs want AI, machine learning, and robotic process automation. Do all of those terms have the same impact on hiring? In other words, is there a better or worse form of automation?
Well, business intelligence, I would say, is a subset of artificial intelligence. So, they're closely related. I'm not sure there's, I think if we're talking about automation, maybe as a bigger picture, if we can take the manual tasks, and we've all seen that, if anyone's familiar with QuickBooks, and our software does it, many other ones do it, where maybe you're taking bank feed information into the system automatically. You've got a scheduled, interface that's running between the accounting system and a bank. So like in our system, an Xledger system, if we do an entry in our system to pay a bill, the bank, we know in Xledger that we paid a bill, the bank feed comes back matching the information that we sent it, that auto clears off of the bank rec. And so that can save a lot of time. Companies that are doing a lot of postings, and I can remember back in the day, people would print out credit card statements or bank statements and start checking, doing reconciliation. So moving that from paper to actually automation can save a lot of time. Now, what does that mean for staffing? That means that the person who is doing manual work, you've now freed up that they can actually spend more time in helping the insight. What is that data telling us, so it can flow up into the organization, giving real insight to management so they can make some decisions. Now, the one caveat to that might be the person that you have doing these manual tasks that can be automated, and you don't need that anymore. They may not be the person that you need in the future to do that analytical work and looking for that insight. They might be, and I think at time and great resignation, people are looking for maybe a higher and best use of themselves. So if you can elevate someone who really wants to get up a level in their technical skill or in their career, moving them from data entry to a more analyst, more advisor role would solve that, as well as not increasing expenses as if you had to add an additional person. So that's an example. I think automation can really help deal with staffing.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chad. And David, for all of the great information and super helpful insight into what you guys do. All right, guys, we are going to end this webinar, but your CPE will be available probably in the next hour or so. So keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, if you have questions or need anything from us, you know where to find us. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Tiffany.
Thank you, guys.